but I also had my passion to where I did my own thing, but my friends were doing drugs, oxycodone, weed, and all that stuff, and partying.
Demetrius was on top of the charts, dominating the Flyweight Championship when he had no choice but to leave the UFC. Johnson never had an easy life. Raised by a deaf mother and abusive stepfather, Demetrious Johnson wished he was more in control. From a child who had never met his dad, to a roaring champion of UFC, to leaving it all at once. How did it all happen? What made the UFC champion and record holder leave his legacy so suddenly? This is the complete story of Demetrious Johnson. Johnson was born in Kentucky on August 13, 1986, and raised in Parkland, Washington. Johnson knew he was made to fight. Before anything else, he became a standout athlete in wrestling, track, and cross country. Just as a little boy, Demetrious Johnson knew something in his life was missing. He had never met his biological father.
At least need to see a picture of my father before he dies or before I lose complete contact.
Demetrius often felt this aching void, but that did not stop him. Johnson was placed second and third for wrestling in the state. At a young age, in his junior and senior years, Johnson was already making his mark. Wrestling was not his only passion. Johnson competed in track and cross-country state championships as well. He was offered many scholarships but feared leaving his mother behind. Instead, he enrolled in Pierce College for 2 years, supporting himself. Later in life, Johnson married his wife, Destiny, on May 11, 2012, who became the biggest driver of Johnson's career and success. She is the best thing that has ever happened to me. Without her, life would be incomplete. Demetrious Johnson had his first professional match of mixed martial arts in 2006. Johnson made it to the top from the very start. He won his professional debut, knocking out his opponent. Johnson then appeared at multiple local shows and won his next 8 fights. He won 5 of them in a row. However, it took a turn when Johnson appeared in the Alaska Fighting Championship. His victory via head kick KO earned him a deal with WEC, World Extreme Cage Fighting. Demetrious Johnson's first WEC 48 match at bantamweight was against Brad Pickett in April 2010. Though Johnson fought with good kickboxing skills, it was simply not enough against Pickett. Ultimately, Johnson lost. However, something unusual happened during this match. Joe Rogan, the infamous UFC commentator, predicted that if WEC were to initiate a flyweight division, Johnson would dominate it. It seemed Johnson had a relatively small bantamweight. Johnson returned to the WEC ring to face Nick Pace in September 2010 at WEC 51. Johnson came back stronger. He handed Pace his first WEC loss. Next, Johnson met Damasio Page in November 2010 at WEC 52. Though Page controlled much of the ring in the first round, Johnson claimed his throne, dictating Page through the second and third rounds. Johnson won by submitting Page in his guillotine choke. Things changed when WEC merged with UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship. In October 2010, the merger moved all WEC fighters to UFC. So did Johnson. Demetrious Johnson made his first UFC debut against Norifumi Yamamoto in February 2011 at UFC 126. Johnson won the match, making way for the start of his legacy. Johnson's first year at UFC was successful. He won 3 of the 4 matches. However, during the match against Eddie Wineland, Johnson withdrew from the bout. Instead, Johnson had other plans. He took part in a 4-man flyweight tournament to determine the UFC's first UFC flyweight champion. Joe Rogan's prophecy for Demetrious Johnson came true. Johnson became the inaugural champion of the UFC flyweight tournament in his final match against Joseph Benavidez in September 2012. Next, Johnson faced John Dodson in January 2013. Johnson won the fight with a unanimous decision. The Ultimate Fighter 17 finale was decided between Johnson and John Moraga. Johnson was pulled out because of an injury. The two met again in December 2013. Johnson successfully defended his title. Everyone at MMA anticipated the rematch between Benavidez and Johnson in December 2013. Johnson truly became a legend that day because he became the first person to stop Benavidez. knocking him out in an emphatic fashion. Johnson also won against Ali Bagautinov in June 2014 at UFC 174. However, Ali later tested positive for erythropoietin, EPO. In 2015, Johnson went for a rematch with John Dodson and won. Johnson throughout won his matches and successfully defended his title. He became unbeatable in 2017 when Johnson won against Wilson Rice on April 15, 2017. Johnson was tied with Anderson Silva for having the most consecutive title defenses, 10, in UFC history. In July 2017, Johnson won an ESPY award for Fighter of the Year. After successful defenses, Johnson's reign of undefeated came to an end on August 4, 2018. He faced Cejudo in a rematch for the UFC Flyweight Championship title. The championship reign ended with a split decision loss to Cejudo. One day, Johnson was streaming on Twitch playing a game, something he often did. On this usual day in a live stream, a fan blatantly asked Johnson, "They're gonna do Ultimate Fighter. It's gonna be all the champions and they're gonna fight you." However, the fighter thought it was a stupid idea. He, without thinking, said it out loud. At this point, Johnson was completely unaware of what was happening behind closed doors at UFC. Right after the live stream, Johnson's phone rang, and it was Dana White on the other end. He had never called Johnson before. Johnson picked up the call and Dana said, "You dumb you just ruined this whole thing we're trying to set up for you." Johnson, confused, told the UFC president he did know what he was talking about. It seemed as if there was miscommunication. However, Johnson decided he will not take the fall. He left the UFC for one championship. For Johnson, it was time he took control of his own life. It was pretty straightforward for Demetrious Johnson. He never liked the way Dana White treated him. At one championship, Johnson made his roaring debut by defeating Yuya Wakamatsu via a guillotine choke submission in the second round. In 2019, after a match with Danny Kingad, Demetrious Johnson became the one flyweight World Grand Prix champion. Johnson ranks as one of the most undefeated champions of MMA. Many, like Joe Rogan and Dana White, believe that Demetrious Johnson is the greatest mixed martial artist in the world, the greatest and the fastest fighter in MMA. He takes control of his opponents right from the very start. He is noted for his ability to land fast punches and kicks to the head or body, then quickly escape an opponent's reach. Demetrious Johnson completed his trilogy bout with Adriano Moraes on May 5, 2023, at One Fight Night 10. Johnson finished Moraes by a unanimous decision. His next combat is yet to be unveiled. This is the inspiring journey of Demetrious Johnson, who rose from a troubled childhood to the royalty of MMA. Like, subscribe, and follow for more.